What if the person you once used to be is not actually gone? This is exactly the question we will sit with tonight. A question that arrives for most of us somewhere in the quiet hours when an old photograph or an old song or the particular slant of autumn light suddenly delivers us back into a version of ourselves we had not thought about in years. A younger self, a lighter self, a self who laughed more easily, or dreamed more boldly, or moved through the world with a kind of openness that somewhere along the way became difficult to locate. We tend to think of this as loss. We say, in the quiet moments when the old photograph surfaces, I used to be so much more myself back then. I used to be lighter. I used to want things without calculating the cost of wanting them. I used to know how to be happy in a way that seems now almost foreign to me. And beneath these observations sits a grief that is rarely named directly, because it does not fit neatly into the categories we usually reserve for grief. No one died. Nothing was technically lost in any way we could point to and explain to someone else. And yet the grief is real. We are mourning a person. That person happens to have been us. Tonight we will explore a different way of holding this particular grief. Not by denying that something has changed, because something always has, but by questioning the assumption beneath the grief, the assumption that the person you were has died, has been replaced, has vanished entirely, leaving only distance between who you are now and who you once were. There is an old teaching, carried across many centuries of Buddhist practice, that offers a different way of understanding what happens to a self across time. It uses the image of a flame passed from one candle to another. When a candle is lit from the flame of another candle, something crosses between them. The second candle now burns where before it did not. But what exactly crossed? Not a physical substance, not a fixed, unchanging thing, carried whole from the first flame to the second, something more like a continuity, a pattern, a process handed forward, changed by the passing and yet undeniably connected to what came before. The flame on the second candle is not identical to the flame on the first. It is also not entirely separate from it. It is what the first flame became in this new place, in this new form. This is offered in the old teaching as an image for how the self moves through time, not as a fixed thing that stays the same and then is suddenly lost, but as a continuous unfolding, flame passed to flame, each moment slightly different from the one before. None of them entirely separate from what came before them. The person you once were at 20 did not simply die when you became the person you are now. That person became this person, the way one flame becomes the next, through a process of continuous change that never actually stopped, that has been happening in every moment of your life, usually too slowly and too continuous for you to notice it happening at all. Consider how strange it would be if you could somehow observe your own life from far enough outside it to identify a single precise moment when the person you were became the person you are. There is no such moment. There was no Tuesday morning when the version of you that loved a particular hobby with total abandon woke up having lost that love entirely replaced overnight by someone indifferent to it. There was no single day when the carefree quality of your younger years vanished, replaced instantly by whatever more careful, more burdened quality has since taken its place. These changes, when we examine them honestly, always turn out to have happened gradually, through thousands of small shifts, accumulating so slowly that no single day contained anything you would have called a loss, even though the cumulative distance, viewed from enough years away, can feel enormous. This is precisely the nature of the flame passed from candle to candle, not a single dramatic transfer, but a continuous process, moment folding into moment, each one nearly identical to the one before it, and yet, across enough moments, producing a transformation so complete that the beginning and the end can feel, when compared directly, like two entirely different people. The river you are today is not the river you were 20 years ago, in the sense that not a single drop of water is the same, and it is also, unmistakably, the same river, recognizable, continuous, still flowing along the same essential channel that has carried it from its source to wherever it finds itself today. You know this feeling, the specific ache of encountering evidence of who you used to be. A letter you wrote in your 20s, full of a certainty about the future you no longer feel. A hobby you once poured yourself into completely, that now sits, mostly forgotten, at the edges of a life that has filled up with other things. A friendship that once felt like it would last forever, that has since faded into occasional messages and eventual silence. A way of laughing, or dreaming, or hoping, that seems to belong to someone else now. Someone you remember fondly, the way you might remember a good friend from years ago, whose current life you no longer know anything about. There is something worth naming about why this particular kind of grief tends to arrive unbidden, in fragments, rather than announcing itself clearly the way other griefs often do. Because no single event marks the transition from who we were to who we are. There is rarely a clear occasion for mourning, no funeral, no formal goodbye, no ritual that gives the grief a container and a beginning and, eventually, an end. Instead, this grief tends to surface in small ambushes, an old song on the radio, a smell that transports you decades backward in an instant, a photograph found unexpectedly while searching for something else entirely. Each ambush delivers a small, sharp reminder of the distance traveled. And because these moments are scattered and unpredictable, the grief itself can feel similarly scattered, never quite gathered into a single, nameable loss that can be properly mourned and then set down. This ache has a particular texture that distinguishes it from other kinds of grief. When we lose someone else, the loss is total and external. The person is simply no longer present in the world, and our grief, however difficult, at least has a clear object. Grieving a former self is stranger, because the person we are grieving is, in some sense, still here, sitting this exact body, breathing this exact breath, reading or listening to these exact words. We are not missing someone who has left. We are missing someone who has, in some way we cannot quite locate, become someone else while remaining undeniably still us. This strangeness, is part of what makes the grief so difficult to name, and part of why it deserves, tonight, to be named directly, rather than left to circle quietly beneath the surface of our thoughts. There is also a particular quality of loneliness that accompanies this specific grief, because it rarely finds sympathy in the way other losses do. Tell a friend that you miss a parent who has died, and they will understand immediately, will offer comfort without hesitation, will recognize the legitimacy of what you are carrying. Tell the same friend that you miss who you used to be, the person you were before children, before a difficult diagnosis, before the accumulated weight of years wore down some quality you once took for granted, and the response is often more uncertain, sometimes even faintly dismissive, as though this grief is somehow less real, less worthy of full attention, because nothing was technically lost that anyone else can point to and verify. Tonight we will sit with 7 stories that have been told in various forms across the tradition. Stories about people who grieved a former version of themselves, and what they discovered, not through forcing themselves back into who they used to be, and not through simply accepting the loss as final, but through a gentler and more accurate way of understanding what actually happened between the person they were and the person they have become. Each of these 7 stories comes from a different circumstance: a craftsman's, a mother, a teacher, a traveler, a soldier, 2 old friends, a dancer, and yet they share a common shape that will become clearer as the night unfolds. In each case, the person believed something essential about themselves had died, replaced by someone diminished or unrecognizable. And in each case, what they eventually discovered was not that their grief had been mistaken or foolish, but that it had been based on an incomplete picture, a picture that grief itself, by its very nature, tends to paint incompletely, focusing so intently on what has visibly changed that it overlooks what has quietly persisted beneath the surface. We will explore this slowly, together, the way we always do. Let the night hold what needs holding. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is where you are, and whether some particular memory of your younger self brought you here tonight. Some of you came here carrying a very specific ache, an anniversary of who you used to be, a birthday that reminds you how far you have traveled from a version of yourself you sometimes miss without quite knowing how to name what you miss. Some of you are simply tired tonight in a way that has made you nostalgic for an earlier, less complicated version of your own life. Even if that earlier version had its own difficulties, you have perhaps allowed yourself to forget in the softening light of memory. Some of you are not thinking about a specific memory at all, only a general and diffuse sense that something has shifted in you over the years, something you cannot quite point to or explain, only feel in the particular quiet of this hour as a kind of distance between who you meant to become and who you have actually become. Some of you may be listening tonight during a season of significant transition, a new job, a new city, a new stage of parenting, a recovery from illness or injury, a retirement, an ending of some kind that has left you uncertain about which parts of your identity will carry forward. and which will be left behind. If this is you, know that the uncertainty itself is not a sign that something has gone wrong. Transition periods are often when the question of continuity feels most urgent and most difficult to answer, precisely because you are standing between two versions of yourself without yet knowing exactly how they connect. And some of you may simply be carrying a quiet, low-grade nostalgia tonight. Nothing dramatic, no specific crisis of identity, only the ordinary human experience of growing older and noticing, sometimes with a small ache, and sometimes with genuine curiosity, how different your days look now from how they once looked. This too is welcome here. Nostalgia, held gently rather than clung to, can be its own kind of wisdom, a way of honoring what has mattered across a life, rather than only what matters right now. All of this is welcome here tonight. We are glad you came. There is no wrong way to miss a person, even when that person is a version of yourself. We will begin now, together, and we will go slowly. There is a teaching in the tradition that speaks directly to tonight's ache, and it begins with a question the old teachers were fond of asking their students. Are you the same person you were as a child? Most students asked this question directly. Answer yes, without much hesitation. Of course, I am the same person, simply older, simply changed by experience, but fundamentally continuous with the child I once was. And then the teacher asks a second question. Is there anything about you now that is identical, without any change at all, to how you were as a child? Not your name, which was given to you and could have been different. Not your body, which has grown and aged and changed in nearly every particular. Not your thoughts, your opinions, your relationships, your daily habits. All of these have shifted, sometimes dramatically, across the years. If nothing remains identical, in what sense are you the same person at all? This is the teaching of anatta, often translated as non-self, though the translation can mislead, because it does not mean that no self exists, only that the self we imagine, a fixed, unchanging essence that stays constant, while everything else changes around it, does not exist in the way we usually assume. What exists instead is something more like a river, continuous, recognizably itself from one moment to the next, and also, if you look closely, never quite the same water twice. The river you swam in as a child is, in an important sense, the same river you might visit today. And in another equally important sense, not a single drop of water in it is the same. This teaching is often misunderstood as a kind of erasure, as though recognizing the self's changing nature means nothing about us matters, or persists, or can be mourned when it changes. This misunderstanding causes real and unnecessary suffering, particularly for people already grieving a former version of themselves, because it seems to suggest that the grief itself is somehow illegitimate, based on a mistaken belief in a self that was never really there to lose. It is worth pausing here before moving further to hold both truths at once. Change is real and continuity is also real, and neither one cancels out the other. This misunderstanding deserves to be addressed directly, because it can compound grief rather than easing it. If someone hears the teaching of anatta as meaning there is no self at all, and therefore nothing was ever really lost. When an earlier version of them seemed to fade, they may feel additionally alienated, not only grieving a former self, but now also being told, in effect, that the grief itself rests on a kind of category error. This is not the intention of the teaching, and it is not how the old teachers meant for it to be received. The river is still a river. It is simply a river that is always, in some sense, becoming a new river, one drop at a time, without ever fully ceasing to be recognizably itself. But this is not quite what the teaching offers. It offers something gentler and more precise. Not that the person you were does not matter, but that the person you were is not actually separate from the person you are now, in the way that grief usually assumes. The flame did not go out. It changed shape, changed candle, continued burning in a new form. Something real crossed from the first flame to the second. A continuity, a pattern, an unbroken thread of experience that has been running through every version of yourself you have ever been, right up to this moment, listening to these words. Tonight's stories will explore this continuity from several different angles. Not to argue that nothing has changed, because change is real and its costs are real, but to offer a different relationship to that change than the one grief usually assumes. Not a death and a replacement, but a continuous unfolding, still burning, still yours, however different the shape of the flame has become. There is one more dimension of this teaching worth naming before the stories begin, because it addresses a question that often arises alongside the grief for a former self. If the self is always changing, always in process, never quite fixed, what is actually being carried forward from one moment to the next? What makes the flame on the second candle recognizably connected to the flame on the first, rather than simply an entirely new fire that happens to have been lit using the old one as a tool? The old teachers offered various answers to this question across the centuries, but many of them converge on something that might be called pattern, or tendency, or habit in the deepest sense of that word. Not the surface habits of daily behavior, but the underlying orientations, values, and characteristic ways of engaging with the world that persist even as their specific expressions change dramatically across a lifetime. Renshu's underlying orientation toward careful attention and patient discovery persisted from his boyhood love of wood through his adult mastery of craft, even though the specific feeling of that orientation changed considerably. Jihao's underlying orientation toward protective, steady presence persisted from his military service through his civilian mentoring, even though the specific context changed entirely. This underlying pattern, not fixed, not static, but recognizably continuous, is perhaps the closest thing to what actually crosses from candle to candle, from the person we were to the person we have become. Understanding this can change how we relate to the specific, painful experience of missing a former self. Instead of asking, hopelessly, where did that person go? We might ask, more usefully, what underlying pattern was expressing itself in that former version of me, and where might that same pattern be expressing itself now? perhaps in a form I have not yet learned to recognize as continuous with what I lost. This is not always an easy question to answer, and tonight's stories do not promise it will resolve quickly or completely, but it offers a direction to look in, which is more than grief alone usually provides. 7 stories are ready. Let us begin. Let us explore a story about a woodcarver who could no longer find the boy who once loved wood. There was a man named Renshu who, as a young child, spending his afternoons in his father's workshop, had felt something close to enchantment every time he picked up a chisel. He remembered, even decades later, the specific quality of that early feeling, the way a plain block of wood seemed in his 8-year-old hands to already contain the shape he was meant to find inside it, and the work of carving felt less like labor and more like a kind of listening, a patient uncovering of something that was already there, waiting to be revealed. He apprenticed formally to his father at 12 years old, learning through the patient, repetitive, unhurried instruction that traditional craft apprenticeships demanded. Years spent simply preparing wood, sharpening tools, observing his father's hands before he was permitted to attempt any carving of consequence himself. He remembered these years, even decades later, as some of the happiest of his life, not despite their slow pace, but because of it, because every stage of preparation felt, to his young mind, like a deepening of the enchantment rather than a delay of it. By 20, he had become skilled enough to take commissions of his own, small pieces at first, decorative panels and simple furniture details, then increasingly ambitious ones as his reputation slowly grew. Until by 30, he had built a modest but respected reputation as a craftsman whose work was sought after in the region, commissioned by families who wanted heirloom pieces made with genuine care rather than mass-produced furnishings. And somewhere in that decade of building his reputation, without any single dramatic turning point he could identify later, the enchantment had quietly gone out of the work. He could not point to a specific day it happened. It was more like a fog rolling in gradually across a landscape until one day he looked up from his workbench and realized he could no longer clearly see the shore he had started from. He still carved well. His technical skill had, if anything, improved considerably since his childhood delight in the craft. His hands were surer now, his eye more precise, his understanding of wood grain and structural integrity far more sophisticated than the 8-year-old who had first picked up a chisel could have imagined. But the work had become work. He carved now to fulfill commissions, to meet deadlines, to sustain the workshop that had become his livelihood and his family's security. The listening quality, the sense of uncovering something already present in the wood, had been replaced by something more like production, competent, reliable, and, if he was honest with himself in the quiet hours, quietly hollow. He mourned this. Not openly, he did not speak of it to his customers or even, for many years, to his wife, because it seemed like an ungrateful thing to mourn, given how well the workshop had provided for his family and how respected his work had become. It felt almost shameful to grieve something so intangible when, by every practical measure available to him, his life in the craft had been a success. Who was he to mourn a lost feeling when his father, who had trained him, had never enjoyed even the modest security Renshu had built for his own family? But in private moments, watching his own hands move through motions they had performed thousands of times, moving almost independently of his conscious attention, he found himself missing the boy who had once felt wood as something enchanted, and wondering whether that boy was simply gone, dissolved somewhere in the accumulated years of commissions and deadlines, and the practical business of being a skilled craftsman, rather than an enchanted child. He would sometimes stop mid-stroke, chisel resting against grain, and simply stare at his own hands as though they belonged to a stranger, competent, efficient, utterly disconnected from the wonder that had once made every stroke feel like discovery rather than repetition. His wife noticed these moments of stillness without fully understanding their cause, sometimes asking gently if something was wrong, and Renshu, unable to articulate a grief that seemed too abstract and too ungrateful to name aloud, would simply say he was tired and return to his work. In his 53rd year, his own young grandson, visiting the workshop for the first time, old enough to hold a small chisel under close supervision, picked up a scrap of soft pine and began, with the uncoordinated enthusiasm of a 6-year-old, to hack at it in a way that bore no resemblance to actual carving technique. Renshu had agreed to this visit somewhat reluctantly, worried the boy would grow bored or injure himself, and had planned to keep the visit brief and carefully supervised, expecting little more than a pleasant afternoon, spent indulging a grandson's curiosity before returning to his usual work. Renshu watched him for a while, prepared to offer correction, and then found himself simply watching instead, watching the boy's face, which carried an expression Renshu recognized with a jolt of something between joy and grief. The specific quality of enchantment he had assumed was permanently lost to him. He sat down beside his grandson and, instead of correcting his technique, asked him what he saw in the wood. The boy, delighted to be asked rather than instructed, described an elaborate and entirely impractical vision. A dragon, apparently, hidden inside the scrap of pine, waiting to be found. Renshu listened to this description with an attention he had not brought to the workshop in years, and something in him unexpectedly stirred. He picked up his own chisel, not for a commission, not for any practical purpose, simply to see whether he could find, alongside his grandson, whatever the boy was seeing in his own more shapeless block of wood. And as his hands moved, slowly and without the practiced efficiency of 30 years of professional carving, he felt something return to him that he had believed permanently gone. Not the boy's exact enchantment, which he understood, even in the moment, he could not fully recover, since he was no longer 8, and could not unknow everything he now knew about wood and craft, and the business of carving, but something adjacent to it, something that had been dormant rather than dead, waiting beneath 30 years of professional habit for a reason to stir again. In the weeks after his grandson's visit, Renshu found himself returning to the workshop earlier than usual, before his commissioned work required his attention, simply to sit with a scrap of wood and see what emerged when he approached it without deadline or obligation. He did not tell anyone about this new habit. At first, treating it almost as a private indulgence, he was slightly embarrassed to admit to, until his wife noticed the change in him and asked gently what had shifted. He came to understand in the months that followed that the boy who had first loved wood had not actually vanished. He had simply been folded into the craftsman Renshu had become, present in every technical decision, informing every choice of grain and shape, even in the commissioned pieces that felt, on the surface, entirely disconnected from that early enchantment. The boy's love of wood had not died. It had become the foundation the adult craftsman's entire skill was built upon, invisible now because it had been so thoroughly integrated into everything Renshu did that he had stopped recognizing it as itself. You may be mourning a version of yourself the way Renshu mourned the enchanted boy. A former passion, a former lightness, a former way of engaging with something you now do more out of obligation than delight. The teaching here is gentle. That earlier self may not be as gone as it feels. It may simply be folded so thoroughly into who you have become that you have stopped recognizing it as a separate, missing thing. The flame did not go out. It became the base of a larger fire. Let us pause here for a moment. There is a particular quality worth noticing in what returned to Renshu that afternoon in the workshop with his grandson. It was not identical to what he had lost. He was clear-eyed about this in the years that followed, careful never to romanticize the recovery into something it was not. He could not simply return to being an 8-year-old discovering wood for the first time. That specific, uncomplicated wonder belonged to a stage of life he could not reoccupy, no matter how much he might wish to. What returned instead was something adjacent, a grown man's version of the same underlying capacity for wonder, informed now by 30 years of technical mastery that the boy could not have possessed, capable of a different and in some ways richer engagement with the material precisely because it carried the weight of everything he had learned in between. Renshu's grandson, unaware of the significance of what his uncoordinated afternoon of carving had set in motion, continued visiting the workshop periodically over the following years, and Renshu found himself, each time, more willing to set aside his commissioned work briefly to simply explore alongside the boy, treasuring these visits as a kind of ongoing reunion with a version of himself he had once believed permanently out of reach. This distinction matters because it points toward something true about all 7 of tonight's stories that is worth naming directly. None of them describe a simple return to a former self, fully restored and unchanged by the years between. What each person discovers instead is a continuity, a thread that runs beneath the surface changes, connecting who they were to who they have become, without requiring either version to be sacrificed or fully recovered. Renshu, in the end, did not simply become the boy again. He became a man who had rediscovered, within himself, the boy's capacity for wonder, expressed now through a craftsman's mature hands rather than a child's uncoordinated ones. This is not a lesser outcome than full restoration would have been. In some ways, informed as it is by everything gained in the intervening decades, it is a richer one, wonder braided together with mastery, rather than wonder alone. Renshu began, in the years following that afternoon with his grandson, to deliberately set aside occasional time in his workshop for work that had no commercial purpose at all. Small carvings undertaken simply to see what he might find in a particular piece of wood, undertaken with no deadline and no customer waiting. He did not abandon his commissioned work, which continued to provide for his family as it always had. But he made room, deliberately, for the boy's approach to coexist alongside the craftsman's discipline, and found that the two, rather than competing with each other, seemed to strengthen each other. His commissioned work took on a quality his customers began to remark on, unable to name exactly what had changed, but sensing, correctly, that something had been restored to it. Renshu and the boy who loved wood and the grandson whose enchantment called something dormant back to the surface. Let the body consider, gently, whatever early passion you may be mourning as lost. Perhaps it is folded into you more thoroughly than grief allows you to notice. Simply breathe. When you are ready, we will continue together. Let us explore a story about a woman who searched for the friend she used to be. There was a woman named Ayame who, in her 20s, living in a small shared apartment with 2 roommates, had been known among her wide circle of friends as the one who organized everything: the gatherings, the spontaneous trips, the late-night conversations that ran until dawn, because no one wanted to be the first to leave. She had a particular gift for drawing people together, for noticing when someone in the group was struggling and finding some way to make space for them, for creating the specific warm chaos that made her small circle of friends feel, for a number of years, like something closer to family than the ordinary category of friendship usually described. Life moved her as it moves most people, through a series of transitions that each seemed reasonable and necessary at the time. A demanding career that required relocating to a city where she knew no one. A marriage that filled much of the emotional and social space her friendships had once occupied. Children whose needs consumed the unstructured time she had once spent on spontaneous gatherings and long conversations. Each individual transition had felt, at the time, like a natural and even exciting next step, the ordinary unfolding of an adult life, moving forward according to its own logic. None of these transitions were, individually, mistakes or losses in any way she regretted, and she would have been quick, if asked directly, to say she was happy with the choices that had brought her to her current life. But cumulatively, across 15 years, she found herself, in her late 30s, looking at her calendar and realizing she could not remember the last time she had organized a gathering of friends the way she once had, effortlessly, as though it were simply part of who she was. Her calendar now contained pediatrician appointments, work deadlines, her children's school events, the occasional, obligatory family gathering, page after page of necessary commitments, with no space remaining for the kind of spontaneous, connective gathering that had once defined her entire social identity. She noticed it too, in small everyday moments, passing a group of friends laughing together at a cafe, feeling a pang of something she could not quite name, half nostalgia and half loss. She found this realization arriving with a specific, quiet ache one evening while scrolling through old photographs on her phone, looking for a picture of her daughter, and instead finding buried in an old album a photograph from a dinner party she had thrown a decade and a half earlier, 12 people crowded into her small apartment. Everyone laughing at something just outside the frame, herself at the center of it, radiant with the particular energy of someone doing exactly what she was built to do. She grieved this quietly and privately, in the particular way busy people grieve things they do not have time to properly grieve, in fragments late at night, scrolling through old photographs of gatherings she had once organized, feeling a mixture of fondness and something sharper, a sense that a woman in those photographs, warm and connective and endlessly available to her friends, had somehow become a stranger to the woman she was now, tired and stretched thin and unable to remember the last spontaneous dinner she had hosted. She did not speak of this grief to her husband, who she knew loved the life they had built together and might not understand why she would mourn anything about it. And she did not speak of it to her remaining close friends, who had their own versions of the same busy, contracted adult life, and might simply nod in tired recognition without either of them finding any real comfort in the shared complaint. An old friend from that earlier circle, someone she had not seen in several years but had maintained loose contact with, reached out during a difficult period in her own life, a divorce, unexpected and painful, that had left her needing exactly the kind of support Ayame had once specialized in providing. Ayame, despite her exhaustion, despite genuinely not having the unstructured time she once had, found herself making space anyway, driving across the city on short notice, sitting with her friend through several difficult evenings, organizing, almost without thinking about it, a small gathering of their old circle to surround their struggling friend with support during the hardest weeks. She surprised herself with how quickly the old instincts returned once called upon, which mutual friends to contact first. What kind of gathering would actually comfort her struggling friend rather than overwhelm her? How to balance structure with the open, unhurried warmth that had once been Ayame's signature. In the middle of organizing this gathering, coordinating schedules, finding a space, thinking carefully about what would actually help her friend rather than simply performing support, Ayame noticed something. The old capacity had not disappeared. It had simply gone quiet, unused for years, not because it had died, but because her life had not, until this moment, called on it directly. The moment it was needed, it returned, not exactly as it had been in her 20s. She now had less time, less energy, more competing demands, but recognizably itself, the same underlying gift for drawing people together and creating space for someone who was struggling. Their old circle, gradually, and without either woman fully orchestrating it, began reconvening more regularly around their struggling friend, the way it once had in their 20s, though now shaped by all the practical constraints of their busier adult lives. Shorter gatherings, more careful scheduling, but the same underlying warmth Ayame remembered from years before. She said to her friend, near the end of that difficult period, something she had not expected to say. I thought I had lost this part of myself. I didn't realize it was still here, just waiting for a reason. Her friend, still fragile from the recent divorce, but visibly moved by everything Ayame had organized on her behalf over the preceding weeks, reached across the table and took her hand before responding. She said, I don't think you lost it at all. I think you simply didn't have anywhere to put it for a while. Your life filled up with other things that mattered too. But the capacity itself, the actual gift you have for this, that doesn't go anywhere just because it isn't being used every day. You may be grieving a version of yourself who seemed more connected, more available, more capable of the specific warmth you associate with an earlier chapter of your life. The teaching here, gently offered, that capacity may not have died. It may simply be waiting, dormant rather than gone, for a context that calls it back into use. A context you may not be able to predict or schedule, but one that, when it arrives, may reveal that the earlier self you have been mourning was never actually as far away as it felt. Let us pause here for a moment. What Ayame discovered in the weeks of organizing support for her struggling friend extended beyond the single gathering itself. Having reconnected with this dormant capacity once, she found herself, in the months that followed, more attentive to opportunities where it might be useful again, not returning to the constant, effortless connective role she had played in her 20s, which her current life genuinely did not have room for, but finding smaller, more sustainable ways to exercise the same underlying gift. A monthly dinner, modest in scale, that she began hosting for a handful of friends who had similarly drifted from the wider circle. A habit of checking in more deliberately with people she knew were struggling, rather than assuming, as she had for years, that she simply no longer had the capacity to notice. She came to understand something important in this process. The grief she had carried for years about her lost connective capacity had, in a strange way, been partly self-fulfilling. Believing the capacity was gone, she had stopped looking for small opportunities to exercise it, which meant it had genuinely gone unused for years, not because it had died, but because her own belief that it had died had discouraged her from testing whether it was still there. Once she discovered, through necessity, that it remained fully intact, she found she could choose, deliberately, to give it small and sustainable outlets, rather than either the constant, all-consuming version of her 20s, or the complete absence she had assumed was her only alternative. This middle path, neither the full recovery of an earlier self nor its complete abandonment, is worth naming directly, because it offers something more realistic than either extreme. Ayame did not become, again, the woman who organized effortless, spontaneous gatherings several times a month. Her life, with its career and marriage and children, genuinely did not have room for that particular configuration anymore, and pretending otherwise would have simply produced a different kind of exhaustion. What she found instead was a sustainable, smaller-scale expression of the same underlying gift, evidence that the capacity itself was not the problem, only the specific, large-scale form it had once taken, a form that had belonged to a particular season of her life that had genuinely ended. Ayame, and the friend who called an old capacity back to the surface, and the recognition that dormant is not the same as gone. Let the body consider, gently, whatever quality you associate with an earlier version of yourself that feels, tonight, simply unused rather than lost. Simply breathe. When you are ready, we will continue together. Let us explore a story about a teacher who mourned the idealist he once had been. There was a man named Bao Shu who had entered the profession of teaching straight out of university, in his early 20s, with a fervor that, looking back decades later, he sometimes found almost embarrassing to remember, a genuine, unguarded belief that education could transform not only individual students, but, cumulatively, the world itself, that every child who passed through his classroom carried within them a spark, that his teaching could help kindle into something remarkable. He had chosen teaching over more lucrative paths available to him, against his own family's mild disappointment, precisely because of this fervor, believing that a life spent in service of young minds mattered more than any measure of financial success he might have pursued instead. He carried this belief through his first decade of teaching with a dedication that his colleagues sometimes found exhausting to be around, staying late to help struggling students, developing elaborate lesson plans that consumed his evenings and weekends, taking each individual failure personally, as though every student he failed to reach represented some fundamental deficiency in his own capacity as a teacher, rather than the simple reality that not every intervention succeeds, that some students face circumstances no amount of dedicated teaching can fully overcome. He kept, in those early years, a small notebook where he recorded specific moments of breakthrough with individual students, a private record of exactly the kind of transformation he believed his teaching existed to produce, rereading it occasionally on discouraging days as evidence that his approach, however exhausting, was genuinely working. His young wife, in those early years, sometimes gently teased him for arriving home well past dinner, still talking animatedly about a particular student's breakthrough that day, as though he had personally witnessed something miraculous, rather than the ordinary, incremental progress that teaching, properly understood, actually consists of. She loved this quality in him even as she occasionally worried about its cost to his own well-being. Watching him take on more and more of his students' struggles as though they were extensions of his own. By his 40th year in the profession, something in Bao Shu had changed that he found difficult to describe precisely, even to himself. He was, by any external measure, a highly competent teacher, experienced, respected by his colleagues, effective at what the school's administration measured as student outcomes. But the fervor of his 20s had quieted into something that felt, on his more honest days, close to weariness. He had watched enough students pass through his classroom, watched enough of his most idealistic efforts fail to produce the transformation he had once believed was inevitable if he simply worked hard enough, that he had, without quite deciding to, lowered his expectations to something more sustainable and, in his private assessment, considerably less inspiring. He noticed this shift most acutely during the school's annual evaluations, moments meant to be reflective and constructive, but which increasingly left him feeling a quiet, private despair he could not fully articulate to his colleagues, who seemed, by contrast, to have made a comfortable peace with the profession's inherent limitations that he had somehow never quite managed to reach himself, or had reached only by paying a cost he rarely examined directly. He mourned this change more than he let on to anyone. In the quiet of his own reflection, he sometimes thought of his younger self with a complicated mixture of tenderness and something close to embarrassment. Tenderness for the earnestness of that young man's belief, embarrassment at how naive it now seemed to him, having witnessed, across 4 decades, the countless ways the world resisted the kind of transformation his younger self had believed was simply a matter of sufficient effort and care. In his final year before retirement, a former student, now a grown woman with children of her own, sought him out after many years of no contact. Having learned through a mutual acquaintance that he was retiring soon, and wanting to see him once more before he left the profession that had, unbeknownst to him for most of the intervening years, shaped a critical juncture of her own adolescence in ways she had carried with her ever since. She told him, over the course of a long conversation, about the specific ways his teaching had shaped her life decades earlier, not through any single dramatic intervention, but through the accumulated effect of his evident care, his willingness to stay late, his refusal to give up on her during a difficult period in her adolescence, when other adults in her life had already written her off. He had recognized her almost immediately despite the decades and the changes time had brought to both of them. And something in him, greeting her, felt a specific warmth he had not expected to feel this strongly for a student whose face he had not seen in over 20 years. Bao Shu listened to this with an emotion he found difficult to name. They spoke for over 2 hours that afternoon, moving from her own memories of his classroom to updates about her current life, her children, the career she had built partly, she told him, because of a conversation they had once had about pursuing meaningful work, even when it felt impractical. Near the end of their conversation, Bao Shu found himself saying something he had not planned to say, the words arriving almost before he had consciously decided to speak them aloud. "I'm not sure I'm the same teacher who taught you. I think I lost some of what made me effective somewhere along the way. I've become more tired, more realistic, less certain that what I do actually matters as much as I once believed it did. His former student considered this for a while, her expression thoughtful rather than immediately reassuring, as though genuinely weighing whether his self-assessment held up against what she had actually experienced as his student decades earlier. She said, "I don't think you're describing loss. I think you're describing what 40 years of caring about something looks like from the inside." 22 is a good age to burn brightly and completely, without any thought for sustainability, because you have not yet learned what the long haul actually costs. 65 is a different age, carrying different responsibilities and a different, harder-won understanding of what actually helps a struggling student versus what merely feels in the moment like heroic effort. You didn't stop caring, and you learned the hard way which battles were worth fighting and which weren't, and that learning probably looks like weariness from where you're standing. But from where I was sitting as your student, all I ever felt was that you cared enough to stay. The exact shape of your idealism doesn't matter as much as you think it does. What mattered was that you showed up again and again for 40 years in whatever form your caring took that particular day. Bao Shu sat with this for a long time after she left. He came to understand gradually that the idealistic young man he mourned had not actually been replaced by a hollowed-out, weary version of himself. That young man's care had simply matured into something less dramatic and more durable, less certain of transforming the world in every individual encounter, but more capable of sustaining 40 years of consistent presence, which was, in its own quieter way, a form of the same original devotion, simply weathered by 4 decades of honest contact with how difficult transformation actually is. You may be mourning an earlier idealism, an earlier fervor, that time and disappointment have worn into something quieter and, on your harder days, less inspiring to you. The teaching here, what looks like the loss of idealism, may, from another angle, be the maturation of the same underlying care into a form durable enough to last decades rather than burning out in a few intense years. The flame did not go out. It learned how to burn for the long distance rather than the short, brilliant sprint. Let us pause here for a moment. He found himself in the days after her visit, retrieving that old notebook from his early years of teaching, the one he had once kept religiously and had eventually stopped updating decades earlier, as the practice came to feel, in his weariness, like a naive ritual belonging to a younger and more idealistic version of himself. Rereading the old entries, he was struck by how many of the breakthroughs he had once documented so carefully bore a quiet resemblance to the small, cumulative moments his former student had just described to him. Evidence, if he needed it, that the underlying pattern of his care had never actually disappeared, only changed its outward expression across the decades. In the weeks following that conversation with his former student, as Bao Shu prepared for his retirement, he found himself reviewing his 4 decades of teaching with a different lens than the one he had habitually used. He had, for years, measured his career against the impossible standard his 22-year-old self had set, a standard of constant, dramatic transformation in every student he touched, a standard no teacher, however gifted or devoted, could actually sustain across an entire career without burning out entirely, or descending into a kind of manic overextension that would have served no one well. Measured against that standard, his later decades had always seemed to him like a diminishment, but measured against a different standard. Not dramatic transformation in every encounter, but sustained, reliable presence across 4 decades, showing up day after day, year after year. For thousands of students across a career, long enough that many of his early students now had children of their own, passing through other classrooms, carrying forward whatever Baoshu had managed to plant in their own parents so many years before. Measured against this standard, his career looked entirely different. Not a story of diminishing idealism, but a story of idealism translated into a form durable enough to actually last, which is, in its own way, a more difficult and more valuable achievement than the more dramatic but ultimately less sustainable fervor of his 20s. He began in his final months before retirement, writing letters to a number of former students he had lost touch with over the decades. Not seeking the kind of validation his one visiting former student had unexpectedly provided, but simply wanting to close his career by acknowledging directly people who had passed through his classroom during all the different seasons of his teaching life, the idealistic early years and the weathered later ones alike. Several wrote back with memories that surprised him, not memories of dramatic interventions or grand gestures, but small, specific moments of ordinary care that had, evidently, mattered far more to them than he had realized at the time. A comment he had made in passing that had stuck with someone for 20 years. A moment of patience during a difficult week that a student had never forgotten. A simple consistency of presence that, cumulatively, had shaped how several of his former students had gone on to think about their own responsibilities toward the people in their care. Baoshu and the former student who saw continuity where he saw only loss, and the recognition that weariness and devotion can be the same thing, worn into a different shape by time. Let the body consider, gently, whatever idealism you may be grieving as lost to disappointment. Simply breathe. When you are ready, we will continue together. Let us explore a story about a mother who missed the woman she was before her children were born. There was a woman named Suyin who, in the decade before becoming a mother, had built a life defined by a particular kind of independence. Solo travels to places her friends found intimidating. A career she had shaped entirely according to her own ambitions, evenings and weekends that belonged entirely to her own interests and impulses, unaccountable to anyone's schedule but her own. Motherhood, when it arrived, transformed this life so thoroughly that Suyin sometimes felt, in the exhausted early years of raising 2 young children, as though the independent woman she had once been existed now only in old photographs and increasingly distant memory. Her days belonged to feeding schedules, and school pickups and the countless small, unglamorous tasks of sustaining two small lives that depended on her completely. The spontaneous solo travel had become, at best, an occasional, carefully planned weekend away, arranged months in advance around childcare logistics that made the old spontaneity feel like it belonged to an entirely different person's life. She loved her children fiercely, with a depth and completeness she had not anticipated before becoming a mother. This was not, for her, a story of regret about the choice itself, but she carried, alongside that love, a persistent grief for the independent woman she had been, a grief she found difficult to speak about because the culture around her seemed to expect mothers to experience motherhood as pure and uncomplicated gain, with no acceptable space for mourning what had been given up to make room for it. Wickers. In her children's later years, as they grew older and required somewhat less constant attention, Su-yin found herself, almost by accident, planning a solo trip for the first time in over a decade. A work conference that happened to be located somewhere she had always wanted to visit, with a few extra days built in for herself before the professional obligations began. She approached the trip with more anxiety than anticipation, uncertain whether the independent traveler she had once been still existed in any recoverable form, or whether over a decade of motherhood had permanently reshaped her into someone who no longer knew how to simply be alone in an unfamiliar impulses, in an unfamiliar place. Her husband, supportive and encouraging, could not fully understand her hesitation. Having never experienced the specific way she felt her own sense of self had been reorganized entirely around the family's needs over the preceding decade, needs he shared, but that had not required the same total reorientation of his own identity that motherhood had required of hers. She landed in the unfamiliar city on a warm evening, checked into a modest hotel she had chosen entirely for herself, rather than for any consideration of children's needs, and stood for a long moment at her window overlooking streets she had never walked, feeling a strange mixture of exhilaration and terror that she had not expected after so many years of confident independence in her 20s. What she found in those few days before her conference began surprised her. The independent traveler had not vanished. She moved through the unfamiliar city with a confidence and curiosity that felt, to her genuine surprise, entirely familiar, the same impulse to wander without a fixed plan. The same pleasure in her own company, the same capacity to make decisions according to nothing but her own interest that had once defined her 20s. It was not identical to who she had been before children. She found herself more than once thinking of her children during the trip in ways her earlier self would not have, missing them in a way that added a new dimension to her solitude that had not existed before motherhood. But the underlying woman, the independent core that she had believed motherhood had permanently buried, was simply there, waiting, exactly where she had left her. She understood, returning from that trip, something she tried later to explain to a friend who was newly pregnant and anxious about losing herself to motherhood the way Su-yin had once feared. I don't think motherhood erased who I was. I think it required all of my attention for a period of years, the way any demanding, important thing requires focus. And the parts of me that weren't immediately needed simply went quiet for a while. They didn't die. They were patient. And when I finally had a few days to reach for them again, they were exactly where I'd left them. A little dusty, maybe, but entirely intact. You may be mourning a version of yourself at a demanding season of life. Parenthood, caregiving, illness, a consuming career, any circumstance that required the whole of your attention for a period of years has seemingly buried beyond recovery. The teaching here, offered gently, what requires your full attention for a season does not necessarily destroy what is not, in that season, being used. It may simply be patient, waiting in the quiet, for the moment your attention becomes available to it again. Let us pause here for a moment. The days leading up to that solo trip were themselves worth noting, because Suyin's anxiety in the weeks beforehand revealed just how thoroughly she had come to believe the independent woman was gone. She found herself, in the days before departure, researching solo travel guides as though she were a complete novice, rather than someone who had once traveled alone across several continents with total ease, second-guessing basic decisions about itinerary and logistics that her 20-something self would have made instinctively and without a second thought. This anxiety was itself a form of evidence for how thoroughly she had internalized the story that motherhood had permanently rewritten her. Not merely occupying her time and attention, but actually altering some fundamental capacity she had once possessed. Suyin's realization on that solo trip did not resolve, in a single moment, the years of complicated grief she had carried about the transition into motherhood. Returning home, she still faced the same practical constraints she had faced before the trip: a full-time job, 2 children whose needs remained constant and demanding, a household that required her sustained attention in ways her 25-year-old self had never had to consider. The trip had not given her back the unstructured freedom of her earlier years, and she was careful, in the months that followed, not to pretend to herself that it had. What it had given her, instead, was something more modest, but in some ways more useful. Proof that the independent woman had not been destroyed, only set aside for a season, which meant she no longer needed to mourn her as permanently lost. This shift in understanding changed how she related to the smaller, more limited opportunities for independence that her current life did offer. An afternoon alone, while her husband took the children to visit his parents. An early morning walk before the household woke. A solo coffee at a cafe on the rare occasion her schedule allowed for it. Previously, she had experienced these small moments with a kind of wistful sadness, aware of how much smaller they were than the life she used to have. Now, understanding the independent traveler as dormant rather than dead, she found she could inhabit these small moments more fully, recognizing them as genuine expressions of the same underlying self, rather than diminished substitutes for a self she had lost. She spoke, a few years later, to her own daughter then a teenager beginning to ask questions about what kind of adult life she might want for herself. About this exact tension, the fear that pursuing a demanding, meaningful commitment like motherhood or any other consuming life choice might mean permanently losing access to other parts of oneself that felt equally important. Suyin told her daughter what she had come to understand on that solo trip, that the self is larger and more durable than any single season of life requires it to be, that setting parts of yourself aside to give full attention to something that matters is not the same as losing those parts forever, and that the discipline of eventually returning to check on what has gone quiet, even if only occasionally, even if only for a few days at a time, is itself a form of care worth practicing throughout a demanding life. Suyin and the independent traveler she found waiting for her, dusty but intact, after over a decade of motherhood's full attention. Let the body consider gently whatever version of yourself a demanding season has required you to set aside. Perhaps it is simply waiting, patient rather than gone. Simply breathe. When you are ready, we will continue together. Let us explore a story about a retired soldier who did not know who he was without his old purpose. There was a man named Jihao who had served for over 2 decades in a role that had, for the entirety of his adult life, given him a clear and unambiguous sense of who he was. A protector, a leader others depended on, someone whose competence in difficult and dangerous circumstances was tested repeatedly and repeatedly proven. His identity for over 20 years had been inseparable from this role. He did not simply do this work. In the deepest sense available to him, he was this work. He had joined at 18, straight out of secondary school, with no meaningful adult life beforehand and no other adult identity to compare it against, which meant the role had not simply shaped an already formed man, but had been present at the very formation of his adult selfhood, woven into the foundation of who he understood himself to be from nearly the beginning of his independent life. In the final years of his service, Jihao had approached his approaching retirement with what he believed was appropriate preparation, financial planning sessions, conversations with his wife about how their daily rhythms would need to adjust, even a brief series of transition workshops offered to service members nearing the end of their careers, which covered practical matters like resume writing and civilian job searches, but touched only glancingly on the deeper questions of identity that would prove, for Jihao, far more difficult to navigate than any practical logistics. His retirement, when it arrived, was not a crisis in the dramatic sense. He had planned for it carefully, had financial security, had a family who welcomed his presence at home after decades of demanding deployments. But in the months that followed, Jihao found himself experiencing something he had not anticipated. A profound disorientation about who, exactly, he was now, that the role which had defined him for over 2 decades no longer structured his days or his sense of purpose. He moved through his retirement with the specific hollowness of a person who has lost not simply an occupation, but the entire framework through which he had understood his own value and identity. He grieved this loss privately, unable to fully articulate it even to his wife, who noticed his withdrawal but struggled to understand its source. Since, by every external measure, his life had improved considerably. More time with family, freedom from danger, a comfortable and secure existence that many people would envy. But Jihao could not shake the sense that the man who had been so certain of his purpose for 20 years had simply ceased to exist upon retirement, leaving behind someone he did not fully recognize, uncertain and adrift in a life that no longer had a clear shape. Jihao's wife, worried enough by his prolonged withdrawal to reach out quietly to people from his old professional circle, was the one who first suggested the visit, hoping a fellow veteran might reach her husband in a way she herself, without the shared experience of service, could not. A former colleague, also retired and further along in adjusting to civilian life, visited him during this difficult period. Having heard through their old network that Jihao was struggling more than his composed exterior let on, and, over the course of several long conversations spread across a number of weeks, offered an observation that eventually helped Jihao understand what he was experiencing differently. His colleague listened patiently to Jihao's description of his disorientation over several visits before offering his own perspective, shaped by his own several years further along the same difficult transition. He said, "I think we make a mistake when we assume our purpose was the uniform or the specific tasks we performed or the danger we faced. It took me nearly 2 years myself to understand this, and I wasted a lot of that time believing, the way you seem to believe now, that I had simply become a lesser version of the man I used to be. I think the actual thing that made us good at that work, the capacity to stay calm under pressure, to care fiercely about people under our protection, to keep showing up even when showing up was hard. That capacity is not the uniform. It's us. And it doesn't disappear just because we've stopped wearing the uniform. It's still there looking for somewhere to go." Jihao considered this over the following months and slowly, imperfectly, began to notice places where his colleague's observation proved true. The neighbor's teenage son, over time, began introducing Jihao to a few friends of his own who were navigating similarly unstable circumstances, and Jihao found himself, almost without deciding to, taking on a mentoring role with young people in his community who lacked stable adult presence in their lives, not through any grand plan, but through a series of small opportunities that arose and that he found himself responding to with the same calm, protective attention he had once brought to his professional role. The first time the neighbor's son called him late one evening, upset and struggling with a decision he did not know how to make alone, Jihao noticed something in himself respond automatically, without conscious deliberation. The same calm, assessing attentiveness that had once guided him through genuinely dangerous situations now applied seamlessly to helping a frightened teenager think through a difficult problem. He discovered that the specific capacities that had defined his 20 years of service, vigilance, care, the willingness to be steady when others needed steadiness, had not disappeared with his uniform. They had simply been waiting for a new place to be useful, uncertain, for a period of months, where that new place might be found. He came to understand gradually that his grief for his old identity had been based on a mistaken assumption that the role itself was the source of who he was rather than a particular expression for a particular period of his life of capacities that were more fundamentally his own than any single role could contain. The uniform had changed. What the uniform had always been covering had not. You may be mourning an old identity, a role, a title, a period of your life that gave you a clear sense of purpose that has since ended, leaving you uncertain of who you are without it. The teaching here offered gently. The role was never the whole of who you were. It was one expression for one period of capacities and qualities that belong to you more fundamentally than any single role can contain. Those capacities are still available to you, looking, perhaps, for a new place to be useful. Let us pause here for a moment. The mentoring work Jihao found himself drawn to did not arrive all at once, or through any single decisive choice to rebuild a new identity from scratch. It began small, a neighbor's teenage son, struggling academically and lacking a stable father figure, whom Jihao began giving occasional rides to school, simply as a favor to the boy's overwhelmed single mother. These rides gradually became conversations, and the conversations gradually became something closer to informal mentorship, entirely unplanned, arising organically from Jihao's steady, undemanding presence in a young life that badly needed exactly that kind of presence. He noticed, doing this work, the same qualities that had once defined his professional service, reasserting themselves in an entirely different context. The vigilance that had once meant scanning a dangerous environment for threats now meant a careful attentiveness to a struggling teenager's shifting moods, alert to the difference between an ordinary bad day and something that might require more serious intervention. The protective instinct that had once meant standing between his unit and danger now meant standing, in a quieter and less dramatic way, between a vulnerable young person and the various forms of neglect and instability that threatened to derail his development. The capacity to remain steady under pressure, once tested in genuinely life-threatening circumstances, now expressed itself in his ability to remain calm and unshaken through a teenager's difficult moods and occasional outbursts, offering a stability the boy had rarely experienced from the adults in his life. Jihao's wife, watching this transformation unfold over roughly a year, told him one evening that she recognized in his renewed engagement with the young man and, gradually, with several other young people in similar circumstances who found their way into his informal orbit, the husband she remembered from before his retirement had ever begun, present, purposeful, animated by a sense that his presence in the world was making a concrete difference to someone who needed it. She had worried, during his difficult early retirement months, that this quality of purposeful presence had simply left him permanently. Watching it return in this unexpected new form, she understood something Ji Hao himself had only gradually come to accept that his purpose had never actually been the uniform. It had been this: the capacity to be steady, protective, and present for people who needed exactly that. The uniform had simply been the first vessel that capacity had found. It would not be the last. Ji Hao and his colleagues' observation that the uniform was never the actual source of who he was, and the mentoring role that revealed his old capacities, were simply waiting for a new place to go. Let the body consider, gently, whatever old identity you may be grieving as lost along with the role that once contained it. Simply breathe. When you are ready, we will continue together. Let us explore a story about two old friends who found, after decades apart, that they were still exactly who they had always been. There were two women, Li Hua and Mei Xiang, who had grown up 2 streets apart and had been inseparable throughout their school years. The kind of friendship that seems, from the inside of adolescence, permanent and unshakable, built on countless shared afternoons and the particular intimacy of having grown up alongside someone during the years when a person's sense of self is still actively forming. Circumstances separated them after their school years in the ordinary way. Circumstances separate most young friendships. Different cities for different opportunities, different demands that consumed their attention, an initial commitment to staying in close touch that gradually, without either of them quite deciding to let it happen, faded into occasional messages, and then, eventually, years of complete silence, broken only by the passive awareness of each other's major life events through mutual acquaintances. Li Hua remembered, in the early years of the separation, making genuine efforts to maintain the friendship across the distance. Long letters at first, then phone calls that grew shorter and less frequent as both women's lives filled with new demands, new relationships, new geographic and professional realities that made the old, easy proximity of their school years impossible to replicate, no matter how much affection remained between them. Mei Xiang, for her part, had moved through a similar arc of gradual drift, initially treasuring the friendship enough to protect it deliberately, before eventually finding the sustained effort simply unsustainable against the accumulating demands of her own new career and new city, the friendship slowly fading, not from any lack of care, but from the simple mathematics of limited time and attention spread across an ever-expanding adult life. Neither woman could point to a specific rupture or falling out that explained the eventual silence. There had been no argument, no betrayal, nothing dramatic enough to constitute an ending in any conventional sense. The friendship had simply been unable to survive the sheer logistical difficulty of sustaining it across the growing distance of their separate adult lives. Fading, not through any decision, but through the accumulated weight of countless small choices to prioritize whatever was most immediately present, over the effort required to maintain a connection that increasingly felt, to both of them privately, like it belonged to a chapter of life that had already closed. Nearly 30 years passed. Both women built entirely different lives in different places, with different families, different careers, different daily rhythms so far removed from their shared adolescence that neither of them, in their more reflective moments, felt entirely certain the other still thought of their old friendship at all, or whether it had simply been a phase of youth that neither of them had actually outgrown so much as outrun through the sheer momentum of separate adult lives. A chance encounter, Li Hua traveling for a family event, happened to be in the same city where Mei Xiang now lived, and a mutual friend who had maintained loose contact with both women over the years, and had long wondered why two people who once seemed so close had drifted so completely apart, arranged a reunion dinner neither woman had specifically requested, but neither refused either, curious despite their uncertainty about what, if anything, would remain of their old connection after 3 decades of separate lives. In the days leading up to the dinner, both women privately rehearsed versions of polite, careful conversation appropriate for reconnecting with someone whose current life they knew almost nothing about. Safe topics, professional updates, the kind of surface level catching up that typically characterizes reunions between people whose closeness has faded into distant acquaintance. Li Hua found herself, the night before, looking through old photographs from their school years, feeling a complicated mixture of fondness and apprehension, uncertain whether the dinner would feel like a warm reunion or an awkward encounter between two strangers who happened to share a distant history. They approached the dinner with considerable nervousness, each privately preparing herself for the possibility of an awkward, effortful evening between two people who might now share nothing beyond a distant shared history. What they found instead, within the first 20 minutes of conversation, surprised them both. The specific rhythm of their old friendship, the particular quality of humor they had once shared, the ease with which one could finish the other's thought, the comfortable silences that had once characterized their adolescent friendship as much as their conversation had, was simply there, immediately available, as though the 30 years apart had been a brief pause rather than a near-complete severance of contact. At one point, refilling each other's cups without needing to ask, both women realized simultaneously they had fallen into a small, wordless domestic rhythm neither had consciously orchestrated, the kind of unspoken coordination that once characterized their shared adolescent household chores. Li Hua said, partway through the evening, with genuine astonishment, "It's like no time has passed at all. I don't understand how this is possible. We're completely different people now. Our lives look nothing alike." Mei Xiang considered this. Mei Xiang set down her cup, considering the question with the same thoughtful pause. Li Hua remembered from decades ago. She said, "Maybe we're not as different as our lives look. Maybe who we actually are. Underneath all the circumstances that shaped our separate 30 years, was always closer to who we were as girls than either of us realized. The circumstances changed completely. But something underneath the circumstances, whatever it was that made us fit together so easily back then, that seems to have just been waiting the whole time for us to be in the same room again. They exchanged contact information. Before the evening ended, both privately determined, this time, not to let distance and busyness erode what they had just rediscovered. The two women rebuilt their friendship in the years that followed, not identically to what it had been in adolescence. They were genuinely different people now, shaped by 30 years of separate experience that neither could fully share with the other. But the underlying connection, the specific resonance that had made them close as girls, proved durable enough to survive 3 decades of separation, almost entirely intact, waiting beneath the surface changes for the opportunity to be recognized again. You may carry old friendships, old versions of yourself in relation to particular people that feel across years of distance entirely lost, replaced by circumstance, buried by time, no longer recoverable in any meaningful way. The teaching here, offered by Lihua and Meixiang's reunion, what feels lost across years of separation may be far more durable than distance suggests. The self you were with a particular person in a particular season may simply be waiting intact beneath the accumulated changes for the chance to be recognized again. Let us pause here for a moment. The dinner itself unfolded nothing like either woman had rehearsed. Within the first 20 minutes, one of them made an offhand joke referencing a private nickname from their school years, and both women found themselves laughing in a way that dissolved almost instantly the careful politeness they had each prepared. What followed was hours of conversation that moved fluidly between decades of catching up and the exact easy rhythm they remembered from adolescence, as though the intervening 30 years had simply compressed into a brief pause between sentences rather than a genuine gulf of separate lived experience. What Lihua and Meixiang discovered in their reunion dinner points towards something specific about how we sometimes misattribute the source of an old self we associate with a particular relationship. Lihua had spent years believing that the easy, playful, unguarded version of herself she remembered from adolescence had simply belonged to that period of her life, a phase she had in the ordinary way of growing older, outgrown, the way one outgrows certain clothes or certain music. She had assumed, without ever quite examining the assumption, that the woman capable of that particular ease was a younger woman who no longer existed, replaced by a more serious, more guarded adult self, shaped by decades of professional responsibility and the ordinary disappointments of adult life. The reunion dinner revealed something different. That particular ease had not belonged to youth in general. It had belonged, specifically, to this friendship, to the unique resonance between these two particular people, a resonance that had apparently persisted, dormant and unused, through 30 years in which neither of them had access to the specific conditions that called it forward. Lihua had other friendships in her adult life, close and valued ones, but none of them called forward quite this same quality of unguarded ease, because none of them carried the particular shared history and particular fit of personality that she and Meixiang had discovered together as girls, and that turned out, remarkably, still to be there, waiting when circumstance finally returned them to the same room. This distinction matters for anyone who has assumed that an easier, lighter version of themselves belonged simply to youth and was lost along with youth's passing. It may be instead that certain versions of ourselves are relationship-specific rather than age-specific, called forward by particular people, particular kinds of connection, that we have not encountered again in quite the same form since. The self is not gone in these cases. It is simply waiting for the specific conditions, often unpredictable and impossible to manufacture deliberately, that will call it forward again. Li Hua and Mei Xiang rebuilt a regular practice of visiting each other several times a year after their reunion, deliberately protecting time for exactly the kind of unguarded conversation that had defined their adolescent friendship, understanding now that this particular version of themselves required this particular connection to exist fully and was worth the effort of maintaining across the geographic distance that had once allowed it to lapse into 30 years of silence. Li Hua and Mei Xiang, and 30 years that turned out to be a pause rather than a severance. Let the body consider, gently, whatever old connection or old version of yourself in relation to someone you love feels tonight, lost to distance and time. Simply breathe. When you are ready, we will continue together. Let us explore a story about a dancer who thought her fearless self had died with her injury. There was a woman named Siulan who had trained as a dancer since early childhood, beginning her formal instruction at 5 years old and progressing through the demanding, competitive stages of pre-professional training with a dedication that impressed even her most exacting instructors, rising steadily through the demanding ranks of pre-professional training by her early 20s to a position with a respected regional company where she was known among her fellow dancers for a particular quality of fearlessness, a willingness to attempt the most physically demanding choreography without the hesitation that more cautious dancers brought to difficult movement, a trust in her own body that seemed, to those who watched her, almost innate, as though caution had simply never been installed in her the way it had in most people. In her 26th year, during a demanding performance, she suffered a serious injury to her hip and lower back. The kind of injury that, her doctors explained gently but clearly, would end her career as a professional dancer. Though with careful rehabilitation she could expect to regain most ordinary function in her daily life, the injury occurred during a lift that had gone wrong in a way no one could have fully predicted. A split-second miscalculation between Xiulan and her partner that transformed in an instant the entire trajectory of a career she had spent 2 decades building. She remembered, even years later, the specific sound her body had made on impact, a sound she sometimes still heard in quiet moments, unbidden, a physical echo of the exact instant her old life ended and an unfamiliar new one began without her consent. The injury itself healed over many months of difficult and often discouraging physical therapy. But something else did not heal in the same way. the fearlessness that had defined her dancing, and in some sense her entire identity, seemed to have been extracted from her along with her career, leaving behind a woman who moved through her body now with a caution and hesitation that felt, to her, like evidence that the fearless dancer she had once been was simply gone. Not injured, not changed, but genuinely deceased, replaced by someone more careful and, in her private assessment, considerably diminished. She grieved this loss with an intensity that surprised even her own family, who had expected her to grieve the end of her dancing career, but had not anticipated the deeper grief for a quality of self that seemed to have vanished alongside it. Her mother, attempting to comfort her in the difficult months after the injury, kept returning to practical reassurances that Xiulan's overall health had been preserved, that she would walk normally again, that many careers ended earlier than dancers hoped, and she still had a decade ahead of her to build something new. Her own physical therapist, a kind and skilled professional who saw dozens of injured athletes and dancers each year, offered similar reassurances framed around measurable functional recovery, tracking her progress in careful clinical notes that documented range of motion and pain levels, without any language for the deeper identity crisis unfolding alongside the physical rehabilitation. These reassurances, though well-intentioned, missed entirely the specific texture of what Xiulan was actually grieving, which had less to do with the career itself and more to do with a fundamental quality of being that she feared had simply been extracted from her along with her ability to perform the demanding choreography that had once defined her professional life. She described it, in a rare moment of openness with her sister, as feeling like she was now living inside a stranger's body, a body that flinched at movements the old Xiulan would have attempted without a second thought, a body governed by a caution that felt, to her, like a betrayal of everything she had once been. Some years after her injury, financial necessity and a genuine, if complicated, love of dance led her to begin teaching children at a local studio, not the elite training she had once received, but ordinary classes for children learning the basics of movement and expression. The studio owner, an old acquaintance from Xiulan's own training years, offered her the position out of genuine respect for her history rather than pity, though Xiulan herself could not initially separate the offer from her own sense of diminished circumstance. She approached this work initially as a compromise, a diminished substitute for the career she had lost, expecting to feel in the studio only the ongoing grief for the fearless dancer she believed she had permanently become without. Her sister, encouraging her to take the position when it was first offered, had framed it optimistically as a way of staying connected to something she loved. But Xiulan privately anticipated something closer to a slow, ongoing torment, daily proximity to a version of dance she could witness but never again fully inhabit herself, a reminder rather than a healing. What she found instead, gradually, over her early months of teaching, surprised her in demonstrating movement for her young students. Simple, low-stakes movement, nothing like the demanding choreography of her professional career. She began to notice moments where her body moved with an ease and confidence she had believed permanently lost to her injury and its aftermath. Not the same fearlessness exactly, she remained and expected to remain more cautious than she had once been, a caution that her injury had taught her for legitimate physical reasons that would not simply disappear, but something adjacent to the old fearlessness, something that emerged specifically in the context of teaching, of demonstrating for children who watched her with open admiration, unaware of everything she had lost, and simply delighted by whatever she showed them. She came to understand, over her years of teaching, that the fearless dancer she had mourned as dead had not actually died with her injury. She had been transformed by it, made more cautious in some contexts, certainly, in ways that were medically necessary and unlikely to fully reverse. But the underlying quality, the trust in movement and the body's expressive capacity that had always been the foundation of her fearlessness, had not been extracted. It had simply gone looking for a new context to express itself in, and had found one unexpectedly. In a studio full of children who needed exactly the confident, joyful demonstration she found herself able to offer them, injury and all. Years later, at a gathering of former company dancers, many of whom had faced their own versions of career-ending injury and the complicated grief that followed, Jiulan found herself in conversation with a fellow former dancer who was still, visibly, in the earlier and more painful stage of the same process. Jiulan had once moved through herself. She told her gently, drawing on everything her own years of teaching had taught her. I used to think my old self died on that stage. I think now that she just had to find a different way to move. The fearlessness isn't gone. It just doesn't look the way it used to, and it took me a long time to recognize it in its new shape. You may be mourning a former fearlessness, a former confidence, a former ease in your own body or your own life that injury, illness, age, or circumstance has seemingly taken from you permanently. The teaching here offered gently, what looks like the death of a quality you once had may instead be its transformation, still present, still yours, waiting for a new context in which to be recognized. Even if that context looks nothing like the one in which you first discovered it in yourself. Let us pause here for a moment. The path from Jiulan's initial grief to her eventual recognition of continuity was neither quick nor straightforward. In the first several years after her injury, she avoided dance entirely, unable to bear the reminder of what she had lost, working instead in an unrelated administrative job that offered stability but no connection to the identity she had built her entire early adulthood around. It was financial necessity, more than any positive impulse toward healing, that eventually brought her back to a dance studio at all. A part-time teaching position that paid better than her administrative work, and that she took reluctantly, expecting the proximity to dance to reopen old wounds rather than begin to heal them. Her first months of teaching were, in fact, difficult in exactly the way she had feared. Demonstrating basic movements for young children, she found herself acutely aware of everything her body could no longer do, measuring every demonstration against the phantom memory of her professional capability, and finding the comparison painful. She nearly quit several times during this period, convinced that proximity to dance, without the ability to dance as she once had, was simply a slower, more prolonged form of the same grief she had been avoiding. What shifted this trajectory was not a single dramatic realization, but an accumulation of small moments across many months. A child's face lighting up at a simple movement Jiulan had demonstrated, a parent thanking her for the particular quality of encouragement she brought to a shy student who had struggled in other classes, a growing recognition, gradual and almost imperceptible at first, that something in her was engaging fully with this work, despite her injury, not merely tolerating it as a diminished substitute for her lost career. She began to notice this engagement, specifically in the moments when she was not thinking about her own limitations at all, when she was simply present with a student, focusing entirely on what that particular child needed to understand about their own body's capacity for expression. In these moments, unmonitored by her own grief, something that felt remarkably like her old fearlessness would surface briefly, before her conscious awareness caught up and reminded her of everything she believed she had lost. Her sister, watching this gradual transformation across several years, remarked once that Jiulan seemed, in the studio, more herself than she had appeared at any point since the injury. Not the exact self she had been before, but someone unmistakably continuous with the fearless young dancer her sister remembered, simply expressing that fearlessness now through teaching rather than performance. Over several years of teaching, these unmonitored moments accumulated into something she eventually recognized as a genuine, if different, relationship to fearlessness. Not the physical fearlessness of attempting demanding choreography which her injury had permanently ruled out, but an emotional and expressive fearlessness in how fully she allowed herself to be present and vulnerable with her students, encouraging their own developing confidence without the self-protective caution that might have made her a more guarded, less effective teacher. She came to understand this as a genuine continuation of the fearlessness that had once defined her dancing, transformed by circumstance into a form her injured body could still fully inhabit. Jiulan, and the fearless dancer she thought had died with her injury, found instead in a studio full of children who called something forward she believed permanently lost. Let the body consider, gently, whatever fearlessness or ease you may be mourning as gone, rather than simply transformed. Simply breathe. When you are ready, we will continue together. 7 stories have arrived tonight. Let them settle now, in whatever order they settle, in whatever quiet way the body chooses to receive them. Renshu and the enchanted boy who loved wood folded so thoroughly into the skilled craftsman he became that Renshu had stopped recognizing him as a separate, missing thing. Ayame and the connective friend who had gone quiet rather than gone, waiting for a context that called her back into use. Baoshu and the idealistic young teacher whose fervor had not died but matured into 40 years of quieter, more durable devotion. Su Yin, and the independent traveler who had been patient through a decade of motherhood's full attention, waiting exactly where she had been left. Ji Hao, and the realization that his old identity had never actually been the uniform, but the capacities the uniform had always been covering, capacities that simply needed a new place to go. Li Hua and Mei Xiang, whose 30 years apart turned out to be a pause rather than a loss, the underlying connection waiting intact beneath decades of separate circumstance. And Xiulan, whose fearless dancing self had not died with her injury, but transformed, finding a new and unexpected shape in a studio full of children. The teaching beneath all seven is the flame passed from candle to candle, the understanding that the self does not move through time as a fixed thing that suddenly dies and is replaced, but as a continuous unfolding, each moment connected to the moment before it, changed by the passing, and yet never entirely severed from what came before. The person you were did not vanish when you became who you are now. That person became this person through a process of continuous change that has been happening in every moment of your life, usually too slowly and too continuously for you to notice it happening at all. This does not mean, of course, that nothing at all has been lost along the way. Change carries real costs, and this teaching is not offered as a way of dismissing the genuine grief that sometimes accompanies looking back at who we used to be. Renshu's early enchantment with wood, in its original childlike form, is genuinely gone. What remains is something changed by decades of professional experience, folded into a different shape. Suyin's decade of motherhood genuinely consumed years of independent living she cannot fully reclaim. The losses tonight's stories describe are real losses, and the teaching does not ask us to pretend otherwise. What the teaching offers instead is a different relationship to those losses. Not the belief that a former self has died and been replaced by a stranger, but the recognition that the former self is more continuous with who we are now than grief usually allows us to see. The boy who loved wood is folded into the craftsman. The connective young woman is dormant, not gone, waiting for context. The idealistic teacher's fervor matured rather than died. The independent traveler was patient rather than erased. The soldier's capacities found a new place to be useful. The old friendship survived 30 years of separation, nearly intact. The fearless dancer transformed rather than vanished. It is worth naming a pattern that runs through all 7 stories, because it offers something practical alongside the comfort of the teaching itself. In nearly every case, the reconnection with a former self required some kind of unplanned encounter, a grandson's enthusiasm, a friend's crisis, a former student's visit, a work trip that happened to include a few free days, a colleague's observation, a chance reunion, the financial necessity of a teaching job taken reluctantly. None of tonight's 7 people deliberately set out to recover a lost former self through effort of will alone. The recovery arrived in every case through circumstance meeting a capacity that had been quietly waiting, patient for the right conditions. This is worth holding gently because it suggests something important about how to relate to your own grief for a former self tonight, not through forceful effort to become, again, exactly who you once were, which tends to fail and produce its own kind of exhaustion and disappointment, but through a more patient openness to the unplanned moments when an old capacity might be called forward by circumstances you cannot fully predict or manufacture. You cannot force the grandson's enthusiasm, or the friend's crisis, or the chance reunion, but you can remain open to recognizing these moments when they arrive, rather than assuming, as all 7 of tonight's people initially assumed, that the capacity being called upon in that moment must belong to someone else, some past version of yourself, no longer available to you. There is also something to notice about how each of tonight's stories required another person to help reveal the continuity that grief had obscured. Renshu needed his grandson's uncoordinated enthusiasm. Ayame needed her friend's crisis. Baoshu needed his former student's visit and her direct observation about what 40 years of care actually looked like from the outside. Suyin needed, in a sense, her own body and the unfamiliar city to reveal to her what remained. Jihao needed his colleague's specific reframing of what the uniform had actually contained. Lihua and Meixiang needed each other directly in the same room. Zhulan needed years of students whose delight in simple movement slowly taught her something Sang, her own inner critic, could not have taught her alone. It is worth pausing on this pattern a little longer, because it runs somewhat counter to how many of us instinctively approach a grief like this. Our cultural habits often push us toward private processing, journaling alone, thinking it through quietly, working out our feelings in solitude before we feel ready to share them with anyone else. There is real value in this kind of private reflection, and nothing about tonight asks you to abandon it. But tonight's 7 stories suggest that private reflection alone may not be sufficient to fully reveal the continuity between who you were and who you are now, precisely because the person doing the reflecting is the same person whose grief has already convinced them that the earlier self is gone. It can be difficult to see past your own conviction using only your own eyes. This suggests that the grief for a former self, though it often feels like a private and internal experience, may be one of the losses best addressed in connection with others rather than in isolation. The continuity between who you were and who you are now may be more visible to someone who knew you across the years, or to someone encountering you fresh without the weight of your own self-judgment, than it is to you alone, measuring yourself against your own memory of what you once were. This is not a prescription. Solitudes and quiet reflection have their own value, and nothing about tonight requires you to seek out anyone before you are ready. But it is worth knowing gently that if the grief for a former self persists, despite your own private efforts to understand it, the missing piece may simply be a witness, someone who can see from the outside the continuity that your own grief has made difficult to see from within. Tonight is not a night for resolving every version of yourself you may be mourning. It is a night for the smaller, gentler possibility that the person you were may not be as far away or as gone as the grief has led you to believe. The flame changed shape. It did not go out. Let the body rest now, fully and completely. Let the stories find their own quiet places, however they choose to gently settle, in the architecture of the body that does not require your conscious attention to do its work. Let the shoulders soften now, dropping gently away from wherever they have been held through the long day. Notice, if you can, gently and without effort, whatever part of your history feels most present tonight. An old version of yourself, an old passion, an old friendship, an old identity that time has reshaped. Let it be acknowledged without needing to be resolved or fully understood before sleep arrives. Consider, gently and without hurry, the years that brought you to this exact moment, lying here, listening to these words. Every version of yourself that has ever existed contributed something to the person who arrived here tonight. The curious child, the uncertain adolescent, the ambitious young adult, whatever difficult or joyful chapter shaped you most, and the person you are right now, breathing in this dark. None of these versions were wasted. None of them are lost in any final sense. They are simply folded together, layer upon layer, into the continuous unfolding that has brought you to this rest. Feel the weight of the body against whatever is holding it, the mattress, the pillow, the surface that has held every version of you that has ever rested here without needing you to be any particular version of yourself in order to hold you fully, without judgment, without preference, simply present beneath you as it always has been. Let the hands rest now, open or loosely curled, exactly as they are tonight, needing nothing further from you. These hands have carried you through every chapter of change you have lived. The person you were at 10, at 20, at whatever age you are now. They do not need to hold on to any particular version of yourself tonight. They are simply allowed to rest, carrying forward quietly whatever continuity has been running beneath all the visible changes of your life. Let the breath move slowly, unhurried, the way it always has, beneath every version of yourself that has ever lived in this body. In gently, reaching all the way down, out, longer, releasing whatever grief for a former self does not need to be carried through the effort of holding it tightly tonight. You are not required, tonight or ever, to reconcile every version of yourself before sleep arrives. You are not required to decide tonight whether the person you used to be is gone or dormant or transformed into who you are now. Tonight is simply for resting in the continuity itself, the quiet, unbroken thread that has been running through every version of you, changed and unchanged at once. The way a flame passed from candle to candle is both entirely new and entirely continuous with what came before it. There is a particular kind of peace available in this recognition, one that does not depend on resolving anything or deciding finally whether you have changed for better or worse across the years. It is simply the peace of continuity itself, the quiet reassurance that whatever you have lost, whatever has shifted and softened and transformed within you, None of it has actually severed you from who you have always fundamentally been. The flame has changed candles many times across your life. It has never once gone out. Let the mind move gently and slowly backward, if it wants to, through some of the quieter versions of yourself that this body has carried across the years. Not to grieve them, and not to force any particular feeling about them, simply to notice them the way you might notice the different rooms of a house you have lived in for a long time. The child you once were, curious about the world in ways that had not yet been complicated or weighed down by the accumulated experience of the years since. The young adult you were afterward, full of certainty and ambitious plans that may or may not have unfolded the way you once expected them to. The person you became through whatever demanding season most shaped your adult life. A career, a relationship, a loss, a responsibility that asked everything of you for a period of years. And the person breathing here now, quietly, in this exact moment, carrying all of these earlier versions forward together, folded gently into whoever you have become by tonight. None of these versions require you tonight or on any other night to choose between them. None of them are in competition with each other for the right to be called the real you. They are simply chapters of the same continuous unfolding, the same flame, passed gently forward through every stage of your life, changed by each passing, and yet never severed from what came before it. The boy who loved wood is somewhere inside the hands that are resting now. The connective friend, the idealistic teacher, the independent traveler, the steady protector, the girl who once shared everything with a friend she thought she had lost, the fearless dancer who found a new shape for her fearlessness. All of these are folded into the person breathing here tonight, in this dark, in this particular hour, however far away any single one of them may sometimes feel. If there is a specific version of yourself that feels most present tonight, a specific age, a specific season, a specific quality you associate with who you used to be, let it simply be gently acknowledged, without analysis, without needing to resolve anything about the distance between then and now. Simply notice it, gently, the way you might notice an old friend passing on the street, a brief moment of warm recognition before returning your attention softly to the quiet room around you. Breathe in now slowly all the way down, and out slowly and gently, releasing. Again slowly, in and out, releasing fully. The flame that was lit so long ago, in whatever gentle form it first took, is still quietly burning. Tonight, in this room, in this body, changed by every year that has passed, and continuous with all of them at once. You are not a stranger to who you used to be, not tonight and not ever. You are simply what that person quietly became, carried forward gently into this moment of rest. Notice the weight of the legs, heavy now and settling further into rest against whatever surface holds them, carrying forward every mile they have walked across every version of your life, every step of every chapter that brought you here. Notice the feet resting quietly now, no longer needing to carry you anywhere at all tonight. There is nowhere further to travel right now, nothing further to reach for. There is only this rest, this quiet breath, this soft accumulation of everything you have ever been, gathered together gently in this single body, in this single moment. If sleep begins to arrive now, gently, let it arrive without resistance, without needing to be invited more formally than this. You do not need to hold on to wakefulness in order to hold on to the continuity we have been exploring tonight. The flame continues burning, whether you are awake to observe it or not. The same way your heart continues beating, your breath continues moving, all the unconscious, faithful processes of the body continuing their quiet work, regardless of whether your attention is present to witness them. Let the eyes rest now, heavy and closed. Let the jaw soften completely. Let whichever version of yourself you have been missing tonight be held gently as part of the continuous flame that has never actually gone out, simply changed shape, the way flames do, the way all living things do across all the years they are given to burn. Breathe slowly and gently, and rest fully, completely. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Quiet Lotus Sleep.